Picture this: a merchant in ancient Rome unwraps a bundle of fabric so fine, it feels like liquid in his hands. The shimmering material came from a place so distant, most people in his world believed it was woven by mythical creatures. Meanwhile, halfway across the globe, a scholar in China pores over a manuscript filled with strange symbols, a gift from travelers who crossed deserts and mountains to bring knowledge from lands beyond the horizon. These weren't isolated moments. They were threads in a vast, invisible web, the Silk Road, a network of trade routes that didn't just move goods, but reshaped civilizations. For over 1,000 years, this was the internet of the ancient world, connecting empires that had never met, sparking exchanges that would alter the course of history. What made the Silk Road extraordinary wasn't just the silk, spices, or precious stones that changed hands. It was the invisible cargo, the ideas, beliefs, and innovations that traveled with them. A single caravan could carry Buddhist scriptures from India to China, Persian astronomy to Byzantium, and Chinese paper-making technology to the Islamic world. Cultures collided and blended in ways no one could have predicted. Foods, languages, even entire religions spread along these routes, turning the Silk Road into a melting pot of human creativity. Think about it: the noodles you love, the numbers you use, even the stories you've heard. Many of these might not exist without the connections forged by traders, pilgrims, and adventurers who dared to cross the unknown. This is a story about more than commerce. It's about how curiosity and courage built bridges between worlds, how a monk from China could inspire art in Afghanistan, or how a Persian doctor's writings might end up healing patients in medieval Europe. The Silk Road didn't just link places, it linked minds. And today, as we trace its paths through dusty ruins and forgotten manuscripts, we're not just uncovering history. We're rediscovering a blueprint for how diversity and exchange can shape a brighter future. So let's step onto this ancient road together and follow the footsteps of those who walked it centuries ago. The journey ahead is filled with surprises, and trust me, you'll never look at the world the same way again. Long before the Silk Road became a bustling highway of ideas and goods, it began with one man's mission and an emperor's obsession with horses. In the 2nd century before the Common Era, China's Han Dynasty was locked in a struggle against nomadic tribes to the north, warriors whose swift, powerful steeds outmatched anything in the imperial stables. Emperor Wu had a radical idea. If he couldn't defeat these horsemen, perhaps he could find allies and better horses far to the west. So he sent a young court official named Zhang Qian on a daring mission, little knowing this journey would change the world. Zhang Qian's story reads like an ancient epic. Captured by nomads and held for over a decade, he never abandoned his duty. When he finally escaped, he didn't turn back. He pressed onward into the unknown, reaching the sophisticated courts of Central Asia. What he found astonished him: vibrant cities like Samarkand and Bukhara, thriving trade networks, and yes, the legendary heavenly horses of Fergana, taller and stronger than any in China. But more importantly, he returned with knowledge that reshaped his empire's worldview. The West wasn't just barren wilderness, it was a mosaic of cultures eager to trade. The routes Zhang Qian explored became the backbone of the Silk Road, but traversing them was no easy feat. Imagine setting out from Chang'an, modern-day Xi'an, with a caravan of camels laden with silk. First, you'd face the Taklamakan Desert, a sea of shifting sands where temperatures swung from scorching days to freezing nights. Then came the Pamir Mountains, where narrow paths clung to cliffs so high, travelers claimed even birds couldn't fly over them. Yet these brutal landscapes weren't just obstacles, they were filters, shaping which goods and ideas could travel. Only the hardiest luxuries like lightweight silk or precious gems could survive the journey, while fragile pottery or heavy grain stayed behind. What emerged from these challenges was a network of exchange as delicate as the silk it carried. A single bolt of fabric might pass through a dozen hands, from Chinese weavers to Sogdian merchants, Parthian middlemen, and Roman aristocrats, each adding value, stories, and cultural meaning along the way. The Silk Road wasn't a single path but a web of choices where traders constantly adapted to politics, weather, and bandits. A monsoon might close sea routes, sending more traffic through mountain passes. A war could divert caravans for years, yet through it all, the flow of goods and the ideas riding with them never fully stopped. This was globalization's first draft, written not by empires but by countless individuals. The merchant who learned a new language to strike a deal, the monk who carried scriptures in his saddlebags, the cook who blended spices from 3 continents into a single dish. The Silk Road didn't have a founder or a fixed map. It grew organically, fueled by human curiosity and the universal desire for connection. And it all began with a quest for horses, proving that history's most transformative journeys often start with the simplest needs. The life of a Silk Road merchant was equal parts adventure and endurance. Imagine loading your goods onto the backs of shaggy, 2-humped Bactrian camels, creatures so perfectly adapted to desert travel they could go days without water while carrying 400 pounds of cargo. These animals were the engines of transcontinental trade, their wide feet preventing them from sinking into sand, their thick eyelashes shielding against dust storms. A single caravan might stretch for miles, a rolling village of traders, guards, and animal handlers moving at the sluggish pace of 15 miles a day. Every creak of the wooden saddles, every jingle of camel bells carried the promise of profit, and the ever-present risk of bandits, sandstorms, or deadly thirst. Survival depended on a network of caravanserais, fortified inns that dotted the route every 20 miles, about a day's journey. Picture walking into one after weeks in the wilderness, the sudden clamor of languages from a dozen lands, the smell of roasting meat and spices, the laughter of merchants swapping stories by firelight. These weren't just pit stops, they were cultural laboratories. A Persian trader might teach a Chinese merchant chess, while a Sogdian musician played a tune that would later evolve into a Turkish folk song. Goods changed hands, yes, but so did recipes, medical remedies, and even jokes, each caravanserai acting as a relay station for civilization itself. The real magic happened in cities like Kashgar, where the northern and southern Silk Road branches converged. Here, under the shadow of the Pamir Mountains, you'd hear a cacophony of tongues: Sogdian, Sanskrit, Persian, Chinese, as traders haggled over bolts of silk or sacks of peppercorns. Bukhara's markets buzzed with even wilder variety: Venetian glass beside Indian rubies, Tibetan musk next to Byzantine gold. But the most valuable commodity wasn't something you could weigh or measure. It was trust. Sogdian merchants, the undisputed masters of Silk Road commerce, built this trust through astonishing feats of multilingualism and adaptability. Born in the fertile valleys of modern Uzbekistan, they established trading colonies from China to the Black Sea, acting as cultural chameleons. A Sogdian might wear Chinese silks at one court, then switch to Persian robes at the next, all while keeping ledgers in half a dozen scripts. Their letters, preserved in the sands of Dunhuang, reveal a world where a father in Samarkand might advise his son in China to buy musk only from Tibetans or avoid the new tax official in Turfan. Yet for all their sophistication, these merchants faced constant peril. A single misstep, trusting the wrong guide, misreading a warlord's mood, could mean losing everything. The real profit often went not to those who carried goods the farthest, but to those who mastered the art of the deal in places like Merv's bustling bazaars, where a clever trader might exchange silver for promises, then promises for favors, weaving a web of obligations stretching across continents. What they left behind was more than wealth. In an age before embassies or international law, these caravans were the glue binding civilizations together. A single merchant's route could connect Buddhist cave artists in Dunhuang with Zoroastrian fire temples in Persia, or carry Neoplatonic philosophy from Athens to the academies of Baghdad. Every camel's footprint in the dust was a stitch in the fabric of the ancient world, one that still shapes ours today. Silk wasn't merely a fabric, it was a revolution woven into threads. Imagine the shock of Roman aristocrats when they first encountered this material. So light it seemed to float, so strong it could deflect arrows, yet so soft it felt like a second skin. No wonder they believed it grew on trees or was spun by mythical creatures. The truth was even more extraordinary. For centuries, China guarded the secret of sericulture with the intensity of a state secret. The entire process, from mulberry leaves fed to silkworms to the delicate unraveling of their cocoons, was a mystery to the outside world, creating a monopoly that made silk worth its weight in gold. The demand in Rome was insatiable. Senators draped themselves in shimmering robes, while the wealthy paid fortunes for bolts of fabric that had traveled over 7,000 miles. Historians like Pliny the Elder complained that Rome's treasury was being drained to the east for this sheer folly. Yet the trade only grew. Silk became more than a status symbol, it was a political tool. Emperors gifted bolts to foreign rulers as gestures of goodwill, knowing the material's allure could soften rivalries or seal alliances. When a Chinese envoy presented silk to a Central Asian king, it wasn't just a gift, it was a silent message of power and refinement, a way to say, this is what civilization looks like. But monopolies never last forever. The turning point came in the 6th century when 2 Nestorian monks smuggled silkworm eggs out of China, hidden inside hollow bamboo canes. They presented them to Byzantine Emperor Justinian, and with that daring act, the spell was broken. Byzantium soon mastered sericulture, cultivating its own silk industry in cities like Constantinople. The secret spread further, to the Islamic world, where techniques flourished in places like Damascus, and eventually to Italy, where cities like Lucca and Venice became weaving powerhouses. Yet even as production spread, Chinese silk retained its mystique. The finest pieces, adorned with intricate patterns of dragons or phoenixes, remained the ultimate luxury, proof that some secrets couldn't be fully stolen. What's remarkable is how silk transcended its material value. In Buddhist rituals, it wrapped sacred texts. Along the Silk Road, it served as a form of currency, traded for spices, gems, or even horses. For nomadic tribes, silk wasn't just for clothing, it was sewn into armor for its surprising strength. And in death, it became a bridge to the afterlife, with nobles buried in layers of silk to honor their journey. This single fabric wove together economies, religions, and empires, proving that sometimes the softest threads can pull the hardest. The Silk Road carried more than silks and spices, it was a conduit for souls. As merchants traversed deserts and mountains, their saddlebags held scrolls, relics, and sacred texts that would reshape spiritual landscapes from the Mediterranean to the Pacific. Among the most transformative travelers were Buddhist monks, who turned trade routes into pilgrimage paths. Take the 7th century monk Xuanzang, who defied imperial bans to journey from China to India in search of authentic scriptures. For 17 years, he braved bandits and blizzards, returning with over 600 Buddhist texts that he translated into Chinese. His travels didn't just bring back words, they sparked a cultural revolution. blending Indian Buddhist philosophy with Chinese thought to create Chan, later known as Zen. But Buddhism wasn't the only faith riding the caravan winds. Nestorian Christianity, a branch of the early church, found fertile ground in Central Asia's melting pot. By the 7th century, Nestorian priests had erected towering stone crosses in Chang'an, China's capital, and even convinced the Tang emperor to endorse their faith as the luminous religion. Their churches stood alongside Zoroastrian fire temples and Buddhist pagodas, a testament to the Silk Road's pluralism. The Nestorians adapted brilliantly, translating the Bible into Sogdian and Chinese, even weaving Christian imagery into art that resembled Buddhist mandalas. Their legacy lingers in a 9th century stone stele in Xi'an, where Syriac script mingles with Chinese characters, a monument to coexistence. Islam's journey was equally dynamic. Sufi mystics followed Muslim traders into the steppes, converting Turkic tribes not through conquest but through poetry and music. The dervishes' whirling dance and the bard's lute became as powerful as the Quran in winning hearts. By the 10th century, Bukhara and Samarkand had transformed into centers of Islamic learning, where scholars like Avicenna blended Greek philosophy with Persian medicine. Even China's mosques bore the imprint of the Silk Road, their curved roofs echoing Buddhist temples while facing Mecca. Zoroastrianism, one of the oldest faiths, traveled westward from Persia, its dualistic vision of light and darkness influencing everything from Jewish angelology to Christian notions of heaven and hell. Fire temples dotted the route from Mesopotamia to Dunhuang, their eternal flames tended by priests who also served as advisors to kings and khans. What made this spiritual exchange possible was a rare pragmatism. Traders knew faith was good for business. A shared ritual could seal a deal, while a holy day might pause a journey without resentment. Caravanserais often had spaces for multiple religions, where a Buddhist might chant beside a Muslim at dawn prayers. This wasn't mere tolerance, it was a recognition that the divine, like silk, could take countless forms. The religions that thrived weren't those that demanded exclusivity, but those that adapted, whether it was Buddha gaining Chinese features or Jesus being depicted as a Central Asian shepherd. By the time these faiths reached their new homes, they were no longer foreign, they were threads in a tapestry richer for their diversity. The Silk Road taught a lesson we still grapple with today, that ideas, like people, are transformed by the journeys they make, and that the most enduring beliefs are those that can travel light. The most revolutionary cargo on the Silk Road weighed almost nothing, just thin sheets made from mulberry bark and rags. Chinese paper, invented 2,000 years ago, didn't just change how people wrote, it changed how they thought. Before paper, the Islamic world relied on fragile papyrus or expensive parchment, limiting scholarship to the elite. But when Chinese prisoners taught papermaking to their Arab captors after the Battle of Tollas in 751, knowledge suddenly became portable. Baghdad's House of Wisdom, a beacon of learning, churned out volumes on everything from medicine to mathematics, each page a silent ambassador of progress. By the 12th century, paper mills in Spain were supplying Europe, fueling the Renaissance centuries before Gutenberg's press. Imagine every textbook, every novel, every government record today owes a debt to that moment when a humble craft crossed continents. Astronomy traveled just as far, carried on star charts etched by Chinese, Persian, and Greek scholars. In Samarkand, the towering observatory of Ulugh Beg produced celestial maps so precise they rivaled modern calculations. Muslim astronomers refined the astrolabe, a handheld computer of the ancient world, using Chinese records of supernova to track cosmic events. These tools didn't just guide caravans across deserts, they helped Christopher Columbus navigate oceans. The same trade routes that moved silk also carried the math behind zero from India to Baghdad. where it merged with Arabic numerals, eventually reaching Europe and transforming accounting, architecture, even the concept of time itself. Then there were the crops that reshaped diets. Persian Khanats, underground irrigation tunnels met Chinese rice terraces in Central Asia, creating oases where none should exist. Walnuts from the Himalayas found new homes in Mediterranean orchards, while grapes from the Caucasus became wine in Chang'an. The humble peach, once exclusive to China, sweetened Persian desserts, then Roman feasts. Each seed that sprouted in foreign soil was a quiet rebellion against scarcity, turning wastelands into breadbaskets, but nothing altered the course of history like gunpowder. Originally a Taoist alchemist's failed attempt at immortality, this volatile mix of saltpeter, sulfur, and charcoal exploded into warfare's future. Arab chemists tweaked the formula, creating Chinese snow for fireworks and flamethrowers. By the time it reached Europe, the recipe had evolved into cannons that toppled castle walls, ending the Age of Knights. The Silk Road didn't just trade goods, it traded power, and sometimes that power could level empires. What's astonishing is how these innovations intertwined. Paper preserved astronomical data that improved navigation, helping ships carry new crops. Gunpowder secured trade routes that spread technologies further. This wasn't random exchange, it was a feedback loop of progress, where each advancement fueled the next. The Silk Road's greatest legacy isn't in museums, it's in the everyday miracles we take for granted, from the books we read to the food we eat, all born from a time when the world first learned to think as one. Walk into a cave in Dunhuang, Western China, and you'll find a symphony of cultures painted on the walls. Apsaras, celestial musicians from Indian mythology, float across the ceiling with scarves swirling in a distinctly Chinese style, their faces glowing with Persian-inspired pigments of lapis lazuli and cinnabar. These caves weren't just places of worship, they were canvases where artists from across Asia collaborated, blending techniques like a chef mixing spices. A single mural might layer Indian storytelling with Chinese brushwork, framed by Hellenistic floral patterns carried from the Mediterranean. This was art without borders, proof that creativity thrives when cultures collide. Nowhere was this fusion more striking than in Gandhara, where Alexander the Great's legacy met the Buddha's teachings. Greek sculptors, descendants of artisans who followed Alexander's armies, applied their mastery of anatomy and drapery to Buddhist iconography. The result, statues of the Buddha with Apollo's serene face, his robes clinging like a Roman toga, yet seated in the lotus position of Indian tradition. Even the halo behind his head, now a staple of Buddhist art, borrowed from Greek depictions of sun gods. These weren't copies, but conversations in stone, where Mediterranean realism softened the abstract spirituality of early Buddhist art. A Gandharan Buddha didn't just teach enlightenment, he embodied the Silk Road's genius for reinvention. Textiles told their own stories of exchange. Sogdian weavers in Central Asia combined Chinese silk with Persian dyes, creating patterns so coveted that Byzantine emperors used them as diplomatic gifts. A single cloth might feature Chinese phoenixes dancing amid Persian palmettes, their colors fixed with Indian indigo. Even the humblest carpet became a cultural palimpsest, Turkic tribal symbols woven into Arab geometric precision, traded to Venice where they inspired Renaissance tapestries. Music and dance traveled just as fluidly. When a Sogdian troupe performed in Chang'an, their whirling dances and lute melodies, ancestors of the modern pipa, electrified Tang Dynasty courts. Soon, Chinese poets were writing verses about Western twirling girls with scarves fluttering like rainbow clouds, while Central Asian percussion rhythms infused imperial ceremonies. The Japanese envoy who witnessed these performances carried them home, where they evolved into gagaku, the solemn court music still played in Kyoto today. What made this artistic alchemy possible was a rare openness. Artists weren't just borrowing, they were collaborating across languages and faiths. A Buddhist monk from Kashmir might sketch a mural's design, a Chinese painter would execute it, and a Uyghur goldsmith would gild the details. No one asked for passports or pedigrees, only skill and vision. The cave walls of Dunhuang, the statues of Gandhara, the textiles of Samarkand, they all whisper the same truth, that beauty, like wisdom, grows richer when shared. The words that traveled the Silk Road carried more than meanings, they carried entire worlds. Picture a Buddhist monk in Dunhuang painstakingly copying sutras from Sanskrit into Uyghur script, his brush strokes adapting sacred Indian syllables to the rolling vowels of Central Asia. Nearby, a Manichaean scribe might be translating hymns from Parthian into Sogdian, his ink mingling Persian mysticism with the pragmatic tongue of Silk Road merchants. These weren't just translations, they were metamorphoses where languages borrowed alphabets like spices borrowed flavors, creating new forms of expression. The Sogdian script, derived from Aramaic, became a linguistic bridge, its letters recording everything from commercial contracts to Buddhist prayers, while Uyghur's vertical strokes, borrowed from Sogdian but echoing Chinese calligraphy, preserved everything from Turkic poetry to Nestorian Christian texts. Nowhere was this linguistic alchemy more transformative than in Baghdad's House of Wisdom, where scholars labored under Caliph al-Mamun's patronage. Here, teams of Jewish, Christian, and Muslim translators rendered Greek philosophy into Arabic, Persian medical texts into Syriac, and Indian mathematical treatises into all of the above. A single manuscript of Euclid's geometry might pass from Greek to Syriac to Arabic, each version annotated by scholars who added insights from Chinese algebra or Babylonian astronomy. This wasn't just preservation, it was reinvention. When Arabic absorbed Persian terms for bureaucracy or Indian numerals for calculation, it didn't just grow richer, it became the new Latin, a lingua franca stretching from Cordoba to the Indus. Even scripts themselves evolved through contact. The angular Arabic alphabet, born in the deserts of Arabia, softened into the flowing Nastaliq script in Persia, perfect for transcribing epic poetry. Further east, Turkic tribes adapted Arabic letters to their own throaty vowels, creating literary traditions that would one day give rise to Ottoman Turkish and Chagatai, the language of Babur's memoirs. Meanwhile, in the Tarim Basin, Buddhist texts appeared in a bizarre hybrid called Brahmi-Tocharian, blending Indian consonants with Central Asian grammar, a linguistic chimera that survived only in the echoes of vanished kingdoms. The true marvel was how these exchanges democratized knowledge. When Buddhist texts shifted from elite Sanskrit to vernaculars like Khotanese or Tangut, teachings once reserved for monks reached farmers and merchants. In Samarkand, Zoroastrian priests wrote ritual guides in Sogdian so traders could practice their faith far from home. Even everyday speech transformed. A Chinese tea merchant might pepper his speech with Persian loanwords for caravan or contract, while a Greek physician in Byzantium could prescribe jujube from Chinese or camphor from Malay, their origins blurred by centuries of use. What emerged was a world where a single word like sugar, from Sanskrit shakara to Arabic sakar to Latin saccharum, could trace the entire Silk Road's path. These linguistic layers still whisper to us today, whether in the check that recalls Persian financial instruments or the typhoon that storms in from Cantonese through Arabic. The road didn't just move goods, it rewired human thought, proving that the most enduring cargo isn't silk or spices, but the shapes we give to shared understanding. A merchant in Samarkand stirs a bubbling pot, tossing in cinnamon from Sri Lanka, saffron from Persia, and ginger from India, each spice a passport stamp from distant lands. This wasn't just cooking, it was alchemy, turning simple grains and meats into flavors that would redefine continents. The Silk Road's greatest magic might have been its ability to make hunger a bridge between cultures. Take something as universal as bread. In Persia, bakers stuffed it with apricots from China to create the first fruit-filled pastries, while in Byzantium, they brushed it with olive oil and garlic, giving birth to ancestors of modern focaccia. Every bite was a conversation across thousands of miles. Consider the humble noodle, a food so basic yet so fiercely claimed by multiple civilizations. Chinese texts from the Han Dynasty describe thin strips of dough boiled in broth, while Etruscan tombs show pasta making tools centuries earlier. The truth. Both probably had a point. Wheat cultivation spread east from Mesopotamia, while boiling techniques traveled west from China. What emerged was a culinary parallel evolution, proof that great ideas often sprout in multiple places when conditions are ripe. Even Marco Polo's famous noodle introduction to Italy was likely a myth. By his time, Sicilian kitchens were already buzzing with dishes like macaroni, shaped by Arab traders who'd brought durum wheat from North Africa. Spices became the ultimate status symbols. Roman elites sprinkled Indian black pepper on everything from peacock pies to wine, paying prices so outrageous that £1 could buy a small farm. When Alaric the Visigoth besieged Rome in 408, he demanded 3,000 pounds of pepper as part of the ransom, a king's ransom indeed. Meanwhile, in Chang'an, Tang Dynasty aristocrats sipped tea scented with cloves from the Moluccas, their cups fragrant with the essence of faraway islands no Chinese sailor had ever seen. The spice trade didn't just flavor food, it rewrote economics, launching voyages that would eventually encircle the globe. Central Asia's contribution was pilaf, a dish that encapsulated the Silk Road's genius. Persian cooks perfected the art of slow cooking rice with lamb and carrots, while Mongol horsemen adapted it by substituting mutton and wild onions. By the time it reached Spain as paella and India as biryani, each version carried whispers of its journey: saffron from the mountains of Kashmir, cumin from the markets of Aleppo, techniques passed down through generations of caravanserai chefs. Even the kebab, that universal street food, transformed as it traveled. In Turkey, it met yogurt and became shish kebab. In Xinjiang, it collided with Chinese cumin and chili to create yong ru chuan, those fiery skewers that sizzle on every street corner today. The true miracle was how these flavors dissolved barriers. A bowl of hand-pulled noodles in Dunhuang might feature Persian coriander, while a Venetian trader's stew could be thickened with almonds from Samarkand. Ingredients became ambassadors. Eggplants from India charmed Abbasid caliphs, peaches from China sweetened Roman feasts, and sugar, once a rare Indian medicine, became the addictive cornerstone of desserts from Baghdad to Paris. When cultures clashed over territory or faith, they often found common ground in the shared pleasure of a well-spiced meal. Today, when you twirl spaghetti on your fork or savor a cardamom-laced chai, you're tasting more than food. You're tasting the legacy of countless unnamed traders, cooks, and adventurers who dared to believe that a stranger's recipe might be worth trying. The Silk Road didn't just move goods, it taught humanity that the most universal language isn't spoken but savored. In the bustling markets of 9th century Baghdad, a physician named Hunayn ibn Ishaq bent over a manuscript, translating the works of the ancient Greek Dr. Galen into Arabic. But this wasn't mere copying, it was reinvention. As his pen moved, he fused Greek theories of the four humors with Persian diagnostic techniques and Indian surgical tools, creating a medical synthesis that would save lives from Cordoba to Canton. This was the Silk Road's hidden legacy, not just the trade of goods but the exchange of healing. Imagine a world where a Chinese herbalist's recipe for ginseng could wind up in a Syrian apothecary's jar, or where a Persian doctor might prescribe Indian turmeric for inflammation, calling it by its Sanskrit name, Haridra. Medicine, like silk, became a fabric woven from countless threads. Central Asia's cities were the looms where these threads intertwined. Take Merv in modern Turkmenistan, a crossroads where Nestorian Christian physicians debated medical ethics with Zoroastrian priests, while Buddhist monks shared acupuncture techniques from Chang'an. The city's hospitals, funded by wealthy merchants, became prototypes for the modern teaching hospital. Here, students pored over texts like the Huangdi Nijing, China's ancient medical canon, alongside the works of Galen and the Ayurvedic master Sushruta. The result, a revolutionary idea that healing wasn't bound by culture. A physician in Merv might treat a fever with Greek bloodletting, follow it with Chinese moxibustion, and prescribe an Indian ginger tonic, all in a single afternoon. The transmission of surgical knowledge was particularly striking. Sushruta's detailed descriptions of cataract surgery, written in 6th century India, reached Persia through Silk Route travelers, where Muslim scholars like al-Zarawi refined the tools into precision instruments. Meanwhile, Chinese pulse diagnosis, an art so subtle it could detect illnesses before symptoms appeared, fascinated Arab doctors who documented it in encyclopedias like Ibn Sina's Canon of Medicine. This wasn't just borrowing, it was cross-pollination. When a Tang Dynasty surgeon stitched a wound with silk thread sterilized in rice wine, the technique eventually reached Venice, where it evolved into modern suturing. Pharmacology became its own universal language. Caravans carried not just spices and silks, but sacks of dried ginger, licorice root, and rhubarb, each with precise instructions for use in multiple tongues. A single Baghdad pharmacy might stock myrrh from Somalia, used as an antiseptic, camphor from Sumatra for pain relief, and Chinese ephedra to treat asthma, their uses meticulously recorded in Arabic, Syriac, and Persian. Even the humble cinnamon stick had dual lives. In China, it warmed the kidneys. In Europe, it masked the taste of spoiled meat. The real innovation came when scholars like al-Biruni systematically compared these traditions, noting how Greek phlegm aligned with Ayurvedic kapha, or how Chinese wind illnesses mirrored Hippocratic imbalances. Public health advances spread just as rapidly. When bubonic plague struck the Mongol Empire in the 14th century, doctors from across Eurasia shared quarantine techniques, Venetian lazarettos inspired by Yuan Dynasty isolation wards, Persian fumigation methods blending with Tibetan herbal smokes. The idea that diseases could travel with caravans led to early contagion theories centuries before germ theory. In Samarkand, astronomers even tracked epidemics alongside comet sightings, sensing correctly that the stars weren't the only things connecting distant lands. What made this medical melting pot possible was a shared humility. Greek texts acknowledged Egyptian anatomy, Persian recipes credited Indian botanists, and Chinese scrolls praised Turkic bone setters. In an age without patents or peer review, knowledge was seen as a river that flowed richer when many tributaries fed it. The Silk Road's greatest prescription wasn't for the body, but for the mind, the understanding that healing, like humanity itself, knows no borders. A Roman noblewoman drapes herself in cobalt blue silk so sheer it ripples like water, but look closer and the patterns reveal a secret, those intricate roundels of facing peacocks. They're not Roman at all. They're Sogdian designs woven by Central Asian artisans who adapted Chinese motifs for Persian tastes, then sold them to Mediterranean elites hungry for exotic luxury. This wasn't just fashion, it was diplomacy in drapery. When Emperor Justinian paraded in Byzantine brocade threaded with golden elephants, he wasn't merely showing wealth. He was projecting power through a fabric that whispered of alliances stretching to India. Silk's allure lay in its versatility. In Persia, it became a political statement. Sasanian kings wore robes emblazoned with symmetrical beasts, lions, griffins, rams, each symbolizing royal authority, yet woven on looms borrowed from Chinese artisans. The patterns traveled too. That iconic pearl roundel motif, born in ancient Bactria, wound up embellishing everything from Tang Dynasty court dresses to Coptic Egyptian tunics. Even the dyes told stories of exchange Persian blues from lapis lazuli mined in Afghanistan, Chinese reds from Cinnabar traded along the Tarim Basin, and Tyrian purple from Phoenicia, reserved for emperors but smuggled eastward in tiny, precious batches. But the real revolution happened when techniques crossed borders. Persian weavers, masters of the vertical loom, taught Byzantines how to layer gold threads into brocade, creating fabrics that shimmered like sunlight on water. In return, Byzantine dyers shared their secret for sea silk, a rare fiber spun from Mediterranean mollusks that Chinese envoys prized as dragon's wool. Central Asian nomads contributed their own genius, felt making. By pressing and steaming wool fibers, they created weatherproof yurts and hats, a technology so practical it was adopted by Tang Dynasty cavalry, whose riders sported pointed caps inspired by Turkic horsemen. The Tang capital of Chang'an became a runway for multicultural style. Aristocrats paired wide-sleeved robes from China with boots from the steppes, while dancers twirled in gauzy Sogdian skirts accessorized with Indian gold bangles. A single tomb mural shows a noblewoman in a striped Aiga coat, her hair piled high in a cushion-style updo, holding a Persian glass goblet, a portrait of cosmopolitan chic. Even military uniforms blended influences. Tang soldiers wore lamellar armor based on Turkic designs, but lacquered in Chinese red and bound with silk cords for flexibility. Textiles also became passports for the marginalized. Sogdian merchants, often viewed as outsiders in China, won social acceptance by gifting rare Western fabrics to officials. Nestorian Christian weavers in Syria coded crosses into vine patterns to discreetly signal their faith. And when Arab conquerors introduced cotton to Central Asia, it wasn't just a new fabric, it was a canvas for cultural survival. Aiga artisans wove Buddhist mandalas into cotton prayer mats, their geometric precision satisfying Islamic aesthetic rules while secretly preserving sacred imagery. The legacy lives on in unexpected places. That pomegranate pattern on your grandmother's tablecloth. It journeyed from Persian royal textiles to Spanish Moorish silks, then jumped to European chintz. The kimono's straight seams, they evolved from Tang Dynasty robes traded to Han Japan. Every time we admire embroidery or choose a pattern, we're touching threads that connected civilizations long before globalization had a name. Rising from the dusty crossroads of Samarkand, the Registan Square isn't just a cluster of buildings, it's a symphony in tile and stone. Picture three madrasas facing each other like old friends sharing secrets, their facades a kaleidoscope of Persian blue domes, Chinese-inspired geometric patterns, and Indian arabesques so intricate they seem to dance in the sunlight. The Ulugh Beg Madrasa, built in the 15th century, boasts a portal taller than 6 grown men, its mosaics depicting stars and galaxies, a nod to the Timurid prince's passion for astronomy, nurtured by Silk Road scholars who mapped the heavens using tools from Baghdad and Beijing. Next door, the Shir Door Madrasa breaks Islamic tradition with roaring tigers on its walls. their faces turned toward the sun in a motif borrowed from Zoroastrian art. And completing the trio, the Tilia Kori Madrasa shimmers with gold leaf, its prayer hall ceiling a celestial map of gilded lotus flowers, a Buddhist symbol repurposed for Islamic devotion. This wasn't just architecture, it was alchemy where every brick whispered of distant lands. 1,000 miles east, the Mogao Caves tell a different but equally dazzling story. Carved into a cliff face near Dunhuang, these 700 sanctuaries are a time capsule of Silk Road spirituality. Step inside Cave 257, and you're surrounded by bodhisattvas draped in flowing Sogdian silks, their halos radiating Hellenistic sunburst. The pigments alone reveal the route's reach. Lapis lazuli from Afghanistan for the blues, cinnabar from Central Asia for the reds, and gold leaf traded along routes patrolled by Turkic horsemen. But the real marvel is in the details. A mural showing a Chinese monk preaching to blue-eyed Tocharian merchants, or a ceiling where Indian lotus motifs morph into Chinese clouds. These caves weren't just places of worship, they were collaborative canvases where artists from every faith and culture left their brushstrokes. Meanwhile, the desert winds carried Islamic architecture deep into Central Asia, where it blossomed in unexpected ways. The Kalyan minaret of Bukhara, dubbed the Tower of Death for its grim history, soars 150 feet with a base of Zoroastrian-inspired fire patterns and a shaft adorned with Kufic script, a marriage of Persian engineering and Arab calligraphy. Further east, the Great Mosque of Xi'an stands as a quiet revolution, its sweeping Chinese eaves sheltering courtyards arranged like a Confucian academy, while the prayer hall faces Mecca with a Qibla wall adorned in Arabic verses carved by Hui artisans using traditional woodblock techniques. Even the humble caravanserai evolved, with Syrian-style arched gateways leading to courtyards ringed by Chinese-inspired wooden balconies, a perfect metaphor for the Silk Road itself, where function and beauty knew no borders. What makes these structures extraordinary isn't just their beauty, but their adaptability. A Buddhist stupa in Afghanistan might incorporate Corinthian columns from Greek colonists, while a Nestorian church in Kyrgyzstan could feature a dome modeled after a yurt. The architects of the Silk Road didn't see styles as fixed, but as ingredients to be remixed, proof that when cultures collaborate, they don't just build walls. They build bridges. Beneath the shimmering silks and fragrant spices, the Silk Road hid a world of peril. Bandits lurked in mountain passes like wolves waiting for stray sheep, their knowledge of terrain making them ghosts in the landscape. The Taklamakan Desert's shifting sands swallowed entire caravans without a trace, while the Pamir's cliffs claimed careless travelers with icy indifference. But the greatest threats weren't natural, they were human. The Xiongnu nomads, masters of the steppe, could appear like a storm on the horizon, their horse archers picking off stragglers before vanishing into the grasslands. These weren't mindless raids, they were calculated strikes against the lifeblood of empires, designed to choke trade routes until kings paid tribute in gold and silk. The Mongols elevated this danger to an art form. Under Genghis Khan, they transformed from scattered tribes into a merciless machine of conquest, their Pony Express system allowing them to outmaneuver even the fastest caravans. A merchant might survive a Mongol encounter by sheer luck, or if his goods intrigued them. Marco Polo's family allegedly won favor by demonstrating European crossbows, proving that sometimes survival depended on novelty. Yet paradoxically, the Mongols' very brutality eventually brought stability. Once they controlled the entire route from China to the Black Sea, their strict punishments for theft created the Pax Mongolica, a golden age of safe passage where, as one Persian historian noted, a maiden bearing gold could walk unmolested from sunrise to sunset. Disease was the silent stalker no sword could deter. The same caravans that carried jade and glass also transported deadly hitchhiker's fleas nesting in fur, microbes hiding in textile bales. When the Black Death erupted in the 14th century, it rode the Silk Road like a wildfire, reaching Crimea from Central Asia in just 2 years. Italian merchants fleeing Kaffa's siege brought it to Europe, where it wiped out half the continent. But this wasn't the first plague to travel the routes. Earlier outbreaks of leprosy and smallpox had already taught cities to quarantine suspicious travelers, with some caravanserais maintaining separate quarters for the sick, an ancient precursor to modern epidemiology. Political conflicts could be just as deadly as any plague. The Tang Dynasty's 7th century wars with Tibet turned the Tarim Basin into a chessboard of shifting alliances, where Sogdian merchants paid taxes to both sides just to keep their goods moving. When Arab armies clashed with Chinese forces at the Battle of Tolas in 751, it wasn't just about territory. It was a struggle to control the paper-making technology that Arab victors would later spread to Europe. Even religions collided violently. Buddhist Aigha kingdoms toppled Zoroastrian Sogdian city-states, while Nestorian Christian gravestones in Mongolia bear curses against false teachers, likely aimed at rival missionaries. Yet for all its dangers, the Silk Road's allure never faded. A single successful journey could make a merchant's fortune, and the thrill of the unknown drew explorers like Xuanzang, who wrote of dodging bandits by traveling at night, his path lit only by stars and faith. The risks shaped the route's very character, spurring innovations like camel caravans armed with crossbows, or the elaborate tally system where merchants split goods between multiple pack animals to hedge against theft. In the end, the darkness only made the light brighter. Every bolt of silk that reached Rome, every Buddhist sutra that made it to Japan, stood as testament to human resilience, proof that even in the face of death and greed, the thirst for connection would always find a way. The Mongols didn't just conquer, they connected. When Genghis Khan unified the fractious tribes of the steppe in the early 13th century, he didn't just build an empire, he built the world's first truly international trade network. Under his rule, the Silk Road didn't just survive, it thrived, entering a golden age historians call the Pax Mongolica. Imagine a 13th century merchant setting out from Venice with a caravan of wool and glassware. For the first time in centuries, he could travel all the way to Beijing without changing currencies, thanks to standardized silver ingots accepted across Mongol lands. Bandits, the penalty for theft was death, enforced by a network of Mongol patrols who treated the routes like arteries of their own body. And if that merchant fell ill, he'd find hospitals in Samarkand staffed by Persian, Chinese, and Nestorian doctors, all funded by the Great Khan's decree. This wasn't just peace, it was prosperity engineered with an iron fist and a velvet glove. At the heart of this system was a radical idea: merit over bloodline. Genghis Khan's most trusted advisors included a Muslim accountant from Bukhara and a Aigha scribe who adapted the Mongol script from Central Asian alphabets. His descendants took this further, appointing Nestorian Christians as provincial governors and Buddhist monks as court astronomers. When Marco Polo's father and uncle arrived in Konbalik, modern Beijing, they weren't just tolerated as odd foreigners. They were hired as engineers, their knowledge of European siege weapons prized alongside Persian hydraulics and Chinese gunpowder. The Mongols didn't just protect diversity, they weaponized it, turning cultural exchange into imperial glue. The Yam postal system was the internet of its day. Picture relay stations spaced every 20 miles across 15,000 miles of empire, each stocked with fresh horses, food, and couriers trained to memorize messages verbatim. A letter from the Persian Ilkhanate to the Yuan court could cover the distance in weeks instead of months, carried by riders who wore bells to warn stations of their approach. But the yam wasn't just for official decrees. It transported everything from Venetian trade contracts to Tibetan medical texts, creating a circulatory system for ideas. When Rabban Bar Soma, a Nestorian monk born in Beijing, embarked on a pilgrimage to Jerusalem, he didn't walk. He traveled under Mongol safe conduct, meeting cardinals in Rome and kings in Paris, his journey made possible by the very infrastructure built to sustain conquest. What emerged was a cultural alchemy no one could have predicted. In Tabriz, Persian miniaturists began painting Chinese dragons curling around Arabic calligraphy. In Hangzhou, Mongol princes staged plays blending Tibetan Buddhist parables with Central Asian music. Even cuisine transformed. Dumplings, once a Central Asian staple, migrated east to become Chinese gyoza and west to morph into Polish pierogi. The Mongols didn't just move goods, they reshaped tastes, beliefs, and identities on a continental scale. Yet their greatest legacy was invisible, the realization that stability breeds connection. For all their brutality, the Mongols proved that when roads are safe, tariffs fair, and ideas free to mingle, humanity leaps forward. The printing press, the compass, even the Renaissance itself, all owe debts to this brief, blazing moment when a nomad empire turned the Silk Road into a superhighway of the mind. History remembers the Silk Road as a world of merchants and monks, warriors and kings, but half its travelers have been erased from the story. Behind every caravan, every treaty, every painted cave wall stood women who shaped this cross-cultural epic in ways we're only beginning to uncover. Take Liu Zhejian, a Han Dynasty princess bundled off to marry a nomadic Xiongnu chieftain in the 2nd century before the Common Era. Her journey wasn't just a political sacrifice, it was a covert diplomatic mission. While her new husband received silks and horses, Liu quietly introduced Chinese agricultural techniques to the steppes, teaching nomads to plant grains that would stabilize their migrations. Her poetry, smuggled back to Chang'an on merchant carts, reveals not a homesick girl, but a sharp observer who compared the winds like knives of the grasslands to the silken breezes of her homeland, subtly advising her brother the emperor on steppe politics. Step into a Sogdian trading post in 7th century Samarkand, and you'd likely find women like Nanai Vandak keeping the ledgers. Sogdian letters discovered near Dunhuang show wives managing entire commercial networks while their husbands traveled. One missive from a woman named Milne reveals her frustration. "You left me in poverty, promising to send goods that never came. Now I weave day and night just to feed our children." Yet these weren't passive victims when Milne's husband abandoned her in cotton. She learned the local language, became a successful textile dealer, and eventually sued him for desertion under Tang Dynasty law. The courts of Central Asia buzzed with female power brokers. Turkan Cotton, an 11th century Karakhanid queen, didn't just influence policy. She commissioned the first madrasas for women in Bukhara, where scholars studied astronomy alongside the Quran. Further east, Empress Wu Zetian of Tang China funneled Silk Road wealth into Buddhist cave temples, insisting artists depict the Bodhisattva Guanyin with her own features, merging spiritual authority with imperial might. Even in death, noble women shaped culture. Princess Yongtai's tomb near Xi'an features frescoes of court ladies playing polo, a Persian sport adopted by Tang aristocrats as a symbol of cosmopolitan taste. Some women turned artistry into rebellion. The 9th century poet Rabia Bolkai, daughter of a Samanid emir, penned verses so bold she was allegedly murdered by her brother. Yet her words lived on, copied by scribes and sung by caravan drivers across Persia. In the oasis city of Turfan, Uyghur women composed love songs blending Turkic folk rhythms with Chinese pentatonic scales, their lyrics scratched onto poplar wood tablets that survived the desert sands. A fragment from one such song whispers across the centuries, "Do you hear the camel bells? They count the miles until I'm in your arms again." The real revelation lies in everyday objects. A child's sock from 8th century Dunhuang, knitted with striped wool from Persia and patched with Chinese silk, tells of mothers mending clothes across cultures. A Sogdian divorce deed, written in both Sogdian and Chinese, shows a merchant couple dividing assets amicably, rare evidence of women's legal agency. Even the humble comb became a cultural hybrid, with Tibetan women carving Buddhist mantras into handles shaped like Central Asian horses. These women didn't just witness history, they stitched it into being. When a Sogdian weaver incorporated Chinese phoenixes into a Zoroastrian fire altar tapestry, or when a Uyghur princess gifted her Tang counterpart a cosmetic set containing Persian rose oil and Indian coal, they were doing more than trading goods. They were rewriting the rules of civilization itself, proving that the Silk Road's greatest treasures weren't carried in saddlebags, but in the minds and hands of those we've forgotten to name. Silk wasn't just a luxury, it was money you could wear. In Han Dynasty China, where coins clinked heavy in merchants' pouches, silk became the ultimate portable wealth. A single bolt of fine fabric could buy a herd of horses or pay a soldier's annual wage, its value as reliable as stamped metal. But silk had advantages coins couldn't match. It weighed less, didn't corrode, and could be cut into smaller pieces like living checks. When diplomats paid tribute to nomadic tribes, they weren't just gifting fabric. They were stabilizing the economy with a currency that doubled as armor lining or a royal gown. West of the Pamirs, the financial landscape shifted to the jingle of silver. Persian merchants favored Sasanian drachms, thin, wide coins stamped with fire altars and kings' profiles, while Roman denarii traveled eastward, their silver content so trusted that Central Asian hoards contain coins worn smooth from centuries of hands. But the real innovation came from the Sogdians, who acted as the Silk Road's investment bankers. They pioneered letters of credit called softoja, allowing a merchant in Samarkand to deposit silver with a moneylender and withdraw it in Chang'an, minus a fee. These weren't just receipts, they were early travelers' checks protected by passwords and seals so intricate that breaking one meant death under Mongol law. The Tang Dynasty's flying cash system took this further. Imagine a tea merchant in Sichuan selling his wares to a Uyghur trader. Instead of hauling heavy strings of copper coins back home, he could deposit them with a government office and receive a paper certificate redeemable in the capital. Suddenly, wealth could move across empires without physically traveling, reducing bandit targets and spurring commerce. This system, born from Tang officials' frustration with transporting tax revenues, became the prototype for paper money, though it would take centuries before Marco Polo gasped at Kublai Khan's printed notes. Jewish merchants operating from Cairo to Kabul added another layer, the Hawala system. Without writing a single word, a trader in Baghdad could repay a debt to a partner in Cordoba by whispering instructions to a trusted intermediary. This honor-based network, secured by family ties and reputation, moved fortunes across continents without coins ever crossing borders. A Geniza document from 11th century Egypt reveals a deal where flax sold in Tunisia financed pearls in India, all tracked through handwritten pledges and verbal promises. The Silk Road's true economic genius lay in its flexibility. When copper shortages hit China, merchants used bolts of plain hemp cloth as small change. In Tibet, bricks of compressed tea became currency, their value rising with age like fine wine. Even shells from the Maldives found their way into Central Asian transactions, proving that commerce could improvise when metals ran scarce. These innovations didn't just move goods, they built the scaffolding of modern finance, from wire transfers to fractional reserve banking. The next time you tap a phone to pay, remember, you're using the digital descendant of a system born when a Sogdian trader first trusted a scrap of parchment more than a purse of gold. Diplomacy on the Silk Road was never just about treaties and trade agreements. It was a high-stakes chess game played with silken gloves and daggers hidden beneath. Take Ban Kao, the Han Dynasty's legendary shadow general. In the 1st century, this former scribe-turned-spymaster was sent to pacify the western regions with just 36 men. Instead of brute force, he orchestrated a masterclass in psychological warfare. By forging alliances with city-states like Kashgar and Khotan, then staging midnight raids to plant false intelligence among hostile Xiongnu nomads, he turned rivals against each other without firing a single arrow. His most audacious move, inviting Xiongnu ambassadors to a banquet only to slaughter them mid-feast, a brutal message that secured Han dominance for decades. This wasn't diplomacy as we know it, it was statecraft with a blade's edge. Meanwhile, 6,000 miles west, Byzantine Emperor Justinian was playing a different kind of game. Desperate to break China's silk monopoly, he dispatched 2 Nestorian monks on a covert mission disguised as Christian missionaries. Their objective: smuggle silkworm eggs out of China, an act punishable by death. The monks reportedly hollowed out their bamboo walking sticks, filling them with precious eggs and mulberry seeds, a deception so bold it shifted the balance of Eurasian trade forever. When they presented their cargo to Justinian in Constantinople, they didn't just bring silk, they brought economic independence, birthing Byzantium's thriving silk industry. Marriage alliances wove their own intricate webs. When Tang Princess Wencheng journeyed to Tibet in 641 to marry King Songtsen Gampo, her dowry wasn't just gold and jade, it was a carefully curated toolkit of soft power. Buddhist scriptures, Chinese agricultural manuals, and even a statue of the Buddha traveled with her, transforming Lhsa's skyline with pagoda-style temples. Yet these unions were far from fairy tales. Tibetan records reveal tensions simmering beneath the surface, like when the princess allegedly hid her prized Buddha statue in a leather bag to protect it from anti-Buddhist factions at court. These brides were political operatives, their trousseaux packed with cultural grenades. The Sogdians perfected the art of playing both sides. As the Silk Road's premier middlemen, they served as translators, bankers, and when convenient, informants for rival empires. A Sogdian merchant might whisper Tang military movements to Turkic khans one season, then supply the Tang with intelligence on Turkic troop positions the next. Their survival depended on this delicate dance, leveraging knowledge as currency in a world where today's trading partner could be tomorrow's conqueror. Even gifts carried hidden agendas. When Arab caliphs sent exotic animals like elephants to Tang emperors, they weren't just displays of wealth, they were tests. Could Chinese stables house such beasts? Did their astronomers understand the zodiacal knowledge encoded in Persian star charts gifted alongside them? Every exchange was a gambit where the wrapping often mattered more than the gift. The Silk Road's greatest lesson wasn't about the silk or spices. It was about the invisible threads of influence that truly bound empires together. For every caravan that crossed the deserts, there were 100 unseen messengers, spies, and royal brides moving in the shadows, proving that sometimes the softest touch could sway what the sharpest sword could not. Buried beneath the shifting sands of the Taklamakan Desert, the ruins of Neo whisper secrets of a lost world. Here, archaeologists brushing away centuries of dust uncovered wooden tablets inscribed in Kharosthi script. an ancient Indian language used to record everything from royal decrees to grocery lists. One fragile document details the sale of a camel, complete with warranty clauses against defects. Another preserves a heart-wrenching plea from an abandoned wife. "You promised to send me fabric for a dress, but only empty words arrived." These weren't just bureaucratic records. They were snapshots of daily life in a thriving oasis city where Indian, Persian, and Chinese traditions collided. The real shock came when researchers realized some documents bore the seal of King Cotton, proof that this remote outpost was once a jewel in the kingdom's crown, a place where silk contracts were negotiated in multiple languages under the shade of poplar trees now long dead. Far to the west, a Soviet-Afghan excavation team stumbled upon a different kind of treasure in 1978. Tilya Teep, the Golden Hill, yielded 6 nomadic tombs so lavish they seemed ripped from legend. Imagine the scene as archaeologists lifted the first golden crown, delicate trees of life with dangling pomegranates, their design echoing both Greek mythology and Siberian shamanism. A dagger's hilt bore the face of Dionysus, god of wine, yet its scabbard was decorated with nomadic animal-style wolves. The most startling find, a Roman coin repurposed as a pendant, its Emperor Augustus portrait rubbed smooth by centuries of worshipful touch. These weren't mere grave goods, they were a cultural blender set to puree, showing how steppe nomads absorbed, remixed, and repurposed the artistic DNA of every civilization they encountered. Then there are the Tarim mummies, China's most controversial corpses. Preserved by the desert's dry air, these copper-haired, tartan-clad individuals died millennia ago, yet their eyelashes still flutter above cheekbones that look more Celtic than Chinese. DNA analysis revealed a shocking truth. These were speakers of Tocharian, an extinct Indo-European language, living in what's now Western China as early as 1800 before the Common Era. Their very existence rewrites the map of early migrations, proving that Caucasian peoples penetrated deeper into Asia than anyone imagined. One particularly striking mummy, the so-called Beauty of Lulan, wore a felt hat with a pheasant feather that wouldn't look out of place in Bronze Age Scandinavia. Nearby, her burial basket held wheat grains matching varieties grown in Mesopotamia, a silent testament to how far agricultural knowledge had traveled before written history began. What makes these discoveries revolutionary isn't just their age or artistry, it's what they say about cultural identity. The Silk Road wasn't a place where civilizations merely traded goods, it was where they shed old skins and grew new ones. A Greek-inspired nomadic crown buried in Afghanistan, Indian legal documents found in China, European-looking mummies resting in Xinjiang, these aren't anomalies. They're proof that the ancient world was far more interconnected than our modern borders suggest. Every time a new cache of Silk Road artifacts emerges from the earth, it doesn't just add to history, it forces us to redraw the lines between us and them altogether. The strings of a lute plucked in 7th century Persia might echo in the melodies of a Chinese pipa, played centuries later, proof that music was the Silk Road's most enchanting stowaway. Picture a Sogdian musician in Samarkand, his duta, a 2-stringed lute with a body carved from mulberry wood, spinning tales of love and loss through vibrating silk strings. That same instrument would travel eastward, its shape bending to Chinese tastes, emerging as the pear-bodied pipa whose rapid tremolos would soundtrack Tang Dynasty banquets. But the transformation didn't stop there. By the time the pipa reached Japan, its curved neck and pentatonic scales had birthed the biwa, an instrument that would later accompany epic samurai tales. This wasn't just adaptation, it was reinvention where each culture tuned the music to its own heartbeat. The erhu's journey was even more remarkable. Born from the Central Asian spike fiddle, This two-stringed wonder shed its horsehair bow and angular frame in China, gaining a snakeskin resonator that hummed with the melancholy of nomadic ballads. Listen closely to its weeping tones, and you'll hear the steppes of Mongolia whispering through its notes, a testament to how instruments became living archives of migration. Persian court musicians left an equally indelible mark. When Tang Emperor Xuanzong established his Pear Garden Academy, he modeled it after Sasanian ensembles, blending Persian harp techniques with Chinese orchestration. The result, a musical fusion where zithers plucked Central Asian rhythms while flutes carried melodies straight from the Iranian plateau. Dance pirouetted across cultures with equal grace. Sogdian whirling girl performers, their scarves fluttering like desert winds, became the toast of Chang'an's elite, inspiring Tang poets to pen verses about rainbow sleeves swirling like sunset clouds. These dances didn't just entertain, they encoded stories. The spiral turns of a Bukharan dancer might depict Zoroastrian fire worship, while the precise hand gestures of a cotton performance echoed Indian mudras. Even the sacred found expression in movement. Buddhist cave murals in Dunhuang showed deities mid-step, their poses mirroring both Indian temple dances and Turkic shamanic rituals. Puppetry turned shadows into diplomats. Indonesian leather wayang puppets borrowed Indian Ramayana epics, while Central Asian rod puppets acted out Persian love poems, all traveling via Silk Road caravans. In Kashgar, puppeteers performed with multilingual scripts, switching between Uyghur and Sogdian to make audiences roar with laughter. The real magic lay in the materials: camel leather cured in Samarkand's sun, painted with Chinese vermilion and lapis from Afghanistan, then strung with Mongolian horsehair. These weren't just toys, they were crossroads of craft and storytelling. What made these arts thrive was their ability to speak without words. A Mongol herdsman might not understand the lyrics of a Persian ghazal, but the ache in the singer's voice needed no translation. When a Turkic bard strummed a coppers and sang of lost love, Chinese merchants wept alongside Byzantine traders. In an age without recordings or sheet music, these fleeting moments bound strangers together, proving that beauty's language has no borders, only endless variations on shared human joy. Every empire has its season, and the Silk Road was no exception. By the 14th century, the once bustling caravanserais began to echo with silence, their courtyards empty of merchants and camels. One of the most decisive blows came from the rise of the Ottoman Empire, which tightened its grip on Constantinople in 1453. Suddenly, the vital land bridge between Europe and Asia became a chokehold. Ottoman taxes and restrictions made overland trade so costly that a bolt of silk could triple in price by the time it reached Venice. European powers, desperate for alternatives, began looking southward to the seas, setting in motion a shift that would change global trade forever. Meanwhile, the oceans were awakening. Centuries before Portuguese caravels rounded Africa, the Ming Dynasty's Admiral Zheng he commanded a fleet so vast it made European ships look like toys. His treasure ships, some stretching 400 feet, with 9 masts and silk sails, sailed as far as East Africa, carrying porcelain, silks, and diplomacy. These voyages proved that maritime trade could move goods in quantities no camel caravan could match. A single ship could carry the cargo of 1,000 pack animals without worrying about bandits or shifting sands. By the time Vasco da Gama reached India in 1498, the writing was on the wall. The future of commerce floated on salt water. Nature itself seemed to turn against the old routes. The once reliable oases of the Taklamakan and Gobi deserts began to vanish, swallowed by expanding sands. Glaciers in the Pamirs retreated, reducing the meltwater that sustained Silk Road towns. Cities like Lulan, once thriving hubs, were abandoned to the dunes, their wooden beams bleached white by the sun. Even the mighty Tarim River, lifeblood of the Tarim Basin, changed course, leaving entire settlements stranded. Climate shifts that had once opened the routes now sealed their fate, as if the earth itself was reclaiming its silence. Yet the end of the Silk Road was not an erasure, but a transformation. The knowledge, goods, and cultures it had mingled didn't disappear. They scattered like seeds in the wind. Venetian glassmakers used techniques learned from Syrian artisans, while Persian astrolabes guided Portuguese navigators. The very spices that once traveled by camel now crossed oceans, flavoring new cuisines and sparking new rivalries. Even the idea of global connection endured, reborn in the age of exploration. The roads may have faded, but the bridges they built between civilizations remained, invisible but unbroken, woven into the fabric of the modern world. The echoes of camel bells may have faded, but the Silk Road's pulse still beats in our interconnected world. Look at the bustling ports of Perils or Gwadar today, and you'll see China's Belt and Road Initiative, a 21st century reimagining of those ancient trade routes. Just as Sogdian merchants once strung together oasis towns with caravans, this modern web of railways, pipelines, and digital highways stitches continents together with steel and fiber optic cables. The cargo has changed. Container ships now carry smartphones instead of spice sacks, but the vision remains startlingly familiar: prosperity through connection. Yet there's a crucial difference. Where the old Silk Road grew organically through countless individual journeys, today's version is a deliberate chess move in global politics, with infrastructure loans and trade deals as its currency. UNESCO preservation of Samarkand's turquoise-tiled madrasas tells another part of the story. These aren't just museum pieces, they're living classrooms. Watch a master ceramicist in Bukhara revive medieval glaze techniques using the same lapis lazuli pigments his ancestors traded to Venice. Or listen to Uyghur musicians in Kashgar perform melodies that blend Persian scales with Turkic throat singing. What's being safeguarded isn't just architecture or art. It's the DNA of cultural collision that made the Silk Road revolutionary. When a Swiss architect studies the wind-cooled courtyards of Yazd's caravanserais for sustainable design, or a Tokyo chef sources saffron from the same Khorasan fields that supplied Tang Dynasty banquets, they're participating in a dialogue that never truly ended. Globalization didn't begin with container ships or the internet. Its blueprint was drawn by 7th century Buddhist monks hauling sutras across the Pamirs. The Silk Road gave us the first multicultural metropolises like Chang'an, where Zoroastrian fire temples stood beside Nestorian churches, proving diversity could be a strength rather than a threat. Fast forward to modern Dubai or Singapore, and you'll see the same principle at work: economies thriving precisely because they became crossroads. Even our digital age owes a debt. The very concept of a network mirrors those fragile chains of caravanserais, where information hopped between nodes just as data packets do today. Perhaps the most enduring lesson lies in the road's resistance to simple ownership. No empire, not Han China, not Rome, not the Mongols, could fully control it. The moment one power tightened its grip, alternative routes sprouted like desert flowers after rain. Today, as nations debate who gets to build the next trade corridors, that same dynamic plays out. The Silk Road's true legacy isn't just the goods or ideas that move. It's the stubborn truth that connection, once forged, can't be easily contained. Whether through fiber optic cables or camel caravans, humanity's progress has always relied on bridges, not walls, and that's a map worth following. Think of the Silk Road as a massive, bustling marketplace, not a single dusty trail winding across Asia, but a sprawling web of land and sea routes connecting countless cultures. The romantic image of caravans trudging along one continuous path is perhaps the most persistent myth. In reality, merchants navigated a shifting mosaic of trails, adapting to seasons, politics, and bandit activity. Some routes cut through mountain passes like the Pamirs, where ice clung to travelers' beards, while others skirted deserts where mirages tricked even seasoned guides. Sea lanes stretched from Guangzhou to the Persian Gulf, with ships carrying ceramics too fragile for camelback. This network was fluid. When war closed one path, another opened, proving the Silk Road was never a road at all, but a living, breathing system of human ingenuity. Another tall tale that only silks and spices changed hands. Sure, luxury goods grabbed headlines. Roman elites did pay a fortune for Chinese silk, and European kings hoarded pepper like gold. But dig into the records, and you'll find humbler treasures shaping daily life. A Sogdian merchant's ledger might list iron plowshares from the Caucasus, boosting harvests in Turfan's fields. Excavations in Xinjiang reveal bundles of garlic and hemp sandals, practical goods that fed and shod ordinary people. Even recycled paper tells a story. Buddhist monks in Dunhuang reused tax receipts as scrap for scriptures, proving bureaucracy fueled spirituality as much as commerce did. The Silk Road wasn't just for emperors and aristocrats. It was the ancient equivalent of a global supply chain, where a farmer's wheat or a potter's jug could travel as far as any jewel. Then there's the myth of perpetual harmony. Popular culture paints the Silk Road as a utopia of cultural handshakes, but tensions simmered beneath the surface. Tibetan and Tang armies clashed over control of the Tarim Basin's oasis cities, while Arab and Chinese forces collided at the Battle of Tolas, a struggle less about territory than paper-making technology. Bandits lurked in the Kara-Kums dunes, and even peaceful trade relied on hard bargaining. A letter from a stranded Sogdian merchant pleads for ransom after Turkic nomads seized his goods, revealing the precariousness behind the glamour. Conflict wasn't the exception, it was a calculated risk, balanced against the promise of profit. The most dangerous misconception that the Silk Road belonged to any one civilization. Chinese histories long framed it as their achievement, while Western narratives often credit Marco Polo with discovering it. Truth is, no empire controlled this chaos of exchange. Sogdians, Persians, Uyghurs, and countless others were co-authors of this story. A Tang Dynasty passport found near Dunhuang lists its bearer as of Sogdian origin, naturalized Chinese, a reminder that identity itself was fluid along these routes. The Silk Road wasn't a monologue of East meeting West. It was a cacophony of voices, each adding verses to an epic that still has no single owner. Peeling back these myths doesn't diminish the Silk Road's wonder, it deepens it. What emerges isn't a sanitized fable, but a gritty, vibrant reality where conflict and cooperation danced, where a humble bag of lentils could travel as far as a king's ransom, and where the real magic lay not in the destinations, but in the countless detours that connected them. Faxian set out with nothing but faith and a walking stick. In the year 399, this 65-year-old Buddhist monk left his home in China, determined to reach the sacred sites of India and bring back authentic scriptures. His journey reads like an ancient epic crossing the frozen wastelands of the Pamirs, where frostbite claimed fellow travelers, then descending into the sweltering jungles of Sri Lanka, where he marveled at ruby-eyed Buddha statues taller than palace gates. For 14 years, Faxian braved bandits and starvation, his meticulous journals preserving details no official chronicle dared mention. The way Central Asian kings competed to host Buddhist scholars, or how Indian monasteries served meals timed by water clocks. When he finally returned to China, his translations of Sanskrit texts revolutionized Chinese Buddhism, proving that knowledge, not relics, was the greatest pilgrimage true treasure. Half a world away, 7 centuries later, a young Moroccan scholar named Ibn Battuta kissed his mother goodbye in Tanya, then didn't return for 24 years. What began as a hajj to Mecca spiraled into the ultimate wanderlust saga. Riding Nile boats and Arabian dhows, camel caravans and Mongol postal horses, he logged 75,000 miles, 3 times Marco Polo's distance. In Delhi, he survived court intrigues as a caddi, then sailed to the Maldives, where his legal expertise earned him 4 wives simultaneously. A tiring but educational experience, his memoirs note dryly. His most startling discovery: in China, he found Muslim communities thriving under Yuan rule, their mosques serving noodles alongside dates. Ibn Battuta's Rihla isn't just a travelogue, it's a living mosaic of the Islamic Golden Age, where a curious mind could journey from Andalusia to Sumatra and find scholarship at every stop. Then there was Princess Wencheng, whose bridal procession to Tibet in 641 was diplomacy in motion. Sent to marry King Songtsen Gampo, her dowry included more than gold, it carried the seeds of cultural revolution. Buddhist statues, medical texts, and mulberry saplings traveled with her, transforming Lhsa's skyline with pagoda-style temples. But this was no fairy tale. Tibetan records hint at her struggles: frostbite during the brutal crossing of the Kunlun Mountains, tensions with the king's Nepalese queen, and her covert efforts to protect Buddhist artifacts from anti-Buddhist factions. Yet her legacy endured. The Jokhang Temple, built to house her Buddha statue, remains Tibet's spiritual heart, while the barley milling techniques she introduced still feed Himalayan villages today. These weren't just travelers, they were human bridges. Faxian's footsteps marked a path for future pilgrims. Ibn Battuta's pen preserved a vanishing world, and Wencheng's marriage became a blueprint for soft power. Their stories remind us that history isn't shaped by empires alone, but by individuals who dared to step into the unknown, carrying nothing but curiosity and the unshakable belief that beyond the next mountain, something extraordinary awaited. The Silk Road has never truly vanished. It simply shape-shifted, reappearing in the pages of novels, the glow of movie screens, and the immersive worlds of video games. Take the journey to the West, China's legendary 16th century epic. While it's framed as a fantastical pilgrimage to India for Buddhist scriptures, every demon-filled mountain and enchanted river mirrors the very real perils of Silk Road travel. The mischievous Monkey King, with his celestial rebellion and magical staff, embodies the spirit of the adventurous merchants who defied deserts and bandits. Even the monk Xuanzang, the story's pious protagonist, is based on a real-life Tang Dynasty traveler whose chronicles became a survival guide for later explorers. This isn't just mythology, it's history disguised as allegory, where silk becomes scripture and every oasis hides a lesson. Fast forward to modern gaming, and the Silk Road takes on new life as a playground for digital adventurers. Assassin's Creed drops players into Masyaf's shadowy alleys and Mongol-occupied Kashgar, where the Brotherhood's stealthy blade work mirrors the real-life espionage of Silk Road diplomats. The game's attention to detail: Persian carpets in caravanserais, the call of muezzins over Samarkand's markets isn't just set dressing. It's a love letter to the crossroads of culture, where a single dagger's design might blend Chinese craftsmanship with Arabic inscriptions. Meanwhile, strategy games like Silk Road turn trade into high-stakes drama, forcing players to balance spice tariffs against pirate raids, recreating the razor's edge economics that once made or broke empires. Literature keeps reinventing the route for new generations. Colson Whitehead's The Underground Railroad reimagines escape routes as literal trains, but the thematic debt to Silk Road networks, clandestine, life-saving, and fragile, is unmistakable. Historical novels like The Silk Roads by Peter Frankopan reframe world history around these arteries of exchange, arguing that globalization began not with steamships, but with stirrups and saddlebags. Even children's books like The Silk Route, 7,000 miles of history, transform yak caravans and sandstorms into vibrant, tactile lessons about connectivity. Documentaries, too, are mining the Silk Road's visual splendor. BBC's The Silk Road series sends cameras soaring over the Pamir's knife-edge passes and into forgotten caves where murals still glow after a millennium. But the real revelation is in the human stories. A Aigha musician restringing a rebab with sheep gut, just as his ancestors did, or a Sogdian descendant in Samarkand baking bread stamped with patterns found on ancient pottery. These aren't dry history lessons, they're reminders that the road's true legacy lives in hands that still weave, cook, and create as their forebears did. What makes the Silk Road eternally fascinating isn't just its past, but its limitless adaptability as a metaphor. In a video game, it becomes a labyrinth of quests. In a novel, it's a foil for themes of displacement and belonging. On screen, its landscapes otherworldly dunes, fortress-like mountains, are characters unto themselves. The route's genius lies in its duality. It was both utterly real and endlessly mythologized, a path walked by merchants in muddy boots and reimagined by poets under starlight. Whether rendered in pixels, prose, or 4K cinematography, its essence remains unchanged, a testament to humanity's unshakable urge to explore, exchange, and dream. Centuries before the term globalization entered our vocabulary, the Silk Road was stitching together a world more interconnected than we often imagine. Take a moment to consider your morning routine: that cup of coffee brewed from Ethiopian beans, the cotton shirt spun from Indian-grown fibers, the smartphone assembled with minerals from 3 continents. These threads of daily life trace back to a fundamental truth the Silk Road revealed: no civilization thrives in isolation. The ancient traders who navigated treacherous mountain passes understood something we're still grappling with today: that prosperity grows from exchange, not exclusion. Yet the Silk Road's true genius lay not in the goods exchanged, but in the spaces between transactions. Caravanserais weren't just pit stops, they were prototypes for today's multicultural cities, where a Persian poet might share verses with a Tibetan monk over shared plates of Central Asian pilaf. Modern Dubai or Singapore's success as global hubs mirrors this ancient recipe: create environments where differences spark innovation rather than discord. When Tang Dynasty Chang'an welcomed Syrian glassmakers and Sogdian musicians as respected residents, it became the 7th century's equivalent of Silicon Valley, a magnet for talent precisely because it celebrated diversity. The lesson: tolerance isn't just moral, it's economical. Trade's dual nature, as both bridge and battleground, remains as relevant now as it was when Rome and Parthia clashed over control of silk routes. The same network that spread Buddhist compassion also carried Mongol siege engineers. Today's supply chain disputes over semiconductors or rare earth metals echo these ancient tensions, proving commerce has always been entwined with power. But history offers hopeful counterexamples. The prosperous Kushan Empire thrived by taxing trade rather than monopolizing it, while Ottoman-controlled Aleppo flourished for centuries as Armenians, Arabs, and Europeans negotiated in its souks. The pattern is clear: when trade flows freely, prosperity follows. When weaponized, it becomes a cudgel. Perhaps the most urgent legacy lies in cultural preservation. The melting pot of Dunhuang's caves, where Indian deities wore Chinese silks and Persian pigments, illuminated Greek-inspired frescoes, shows what's at stake when we lose shared heritage. Today, as ancient sites like Palmyra face destruction and languages like Sogdian fade into history, we're reminded that globalization's shadow is cultural homogenization. But the Silk Road offers an alternative model. The Uyghur artisans of Kashgar who still hand-carve wooden instruments using medieval designs, or the Venetian glassmakers employing recipes perfected during Marco Polo's era. These aren't museum pieces, they're living traditions proving that heritage thrives when adapted, not frozen. The road's deepest wisdom might be its quiet rebuke of zero-sum thinking. A Sogdian merchant didn't see a Chinese rival as a threat, but as a potential partner in reaching Roman markets. When papermaking spread from China to Baghdad to Toledo, each civilization improved the technology. Chinese hemp fibers meeting Arab sizing techniques to create the paper that would preserve both Confucian classics and Aristotelian philosophy. Our modern challenges, climate change, pandemics, cybersecurity, demand this same collaborative spirit. The Silk Road's greatest gift wasn't its cargo, but its blueprint. A world where borders mark meeting points, not barriers, and where the next great idea might come from the most unexpected exchange. As we retrace the footsteps of Silk Road merchants and monks, one truth becomes undeniable. This ancient network didn't just move objects across continents, it reshaped the very fabric of human thought. The spices in your pantry, the numbers on your screen, even the stories whispered to children at bedtime, each carries echoes of that vast, invisible web of connection. Consider the humble compass, born from Chinese divination tools perfected by Arab navigators, then carried to Europe where it would guide ships to uncharted worlds. Or the paper beneath your fingertips, its journey from mulberry bark to medieval manuscripts, a testament to how knowledge, once set free, becomes unstoppable. These aren't relics of the past, they're living proof that innovation has always been a collaborative act. Yet the Silk Road's greatest lesson isn't about what traveled, it's about who did. The Sogdian merchant who mastered 6 languages to broker deals, the Buddhist nun who carried sutras through blizzards, the Nestorian doctor who blended Greek and Persian medicine, they were the original global citizens. In an age before passports, their currency was curiosity, their visa an open mind. Today, as we navigate our own crossroads of culture and technology, their example lights the way. When a chef in Istanbul reinvents a recipe from a crumbling caravan journal, or a programmer in Bangalore builds an app using algorithms first penned in Arabic numerals, they're honoring that same spirit of fearless exchange. So what does this mean for us? The Silk Road whispers a counterintuitive truth, that our differences aren't divisions but doorways. Just as Tang Dynasty porcelain gained new life painted with Persian cobalt, or Indian mathematical concepts blossomed in Baghdad's observatories, our modern world thrives when ideas intermingle. The next time you scroll through global news or taste a dish from afar, remember, you're not just a spectator of history, but a participant in its unbroken chain. If this journey through time has sparked your curiosity, why not join the conversation? Share in the comments which Silk Road story resonated most. Was it the daring of Zhang Qian, the artistry of Dunhuang's caves, or perhaps the unsung heroism of women like Mune? And if you're hungry for more cross-cultural adventures, let me know where we should venture next, to the maritime spice routes of the Indian Ocean, or maybe the trans-Saharan caravans that connected Timbuktu to the Mediterranean. Until then, keep weaving your own threads into humanity's grand tapestry. After all, the next chapter of connection isn't written yet, and who knows what wonders await when we dare to explore.